Hey everyone, it's Lena Howland reporting for ABC 10. I wanted to take you live right now to Wenger Farms. I'm here with Jake Wenger. He's one of our local farmers in Modesto. We're working on a pretty big story today about the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. This is the plan that has been known as what farmers are calling the state water grab. Now, this is something that I've been reporting on ever since I started at ABC 10. And when I first started here, I actually came out to talk to Jake, and Jake was the first person to kind of introduce me to this plan and to walk me through what this means and how this is going to impact a lot of our farmers, or all of our farmers here in this area, in Stanislaus County and San Joaquin County, all across this area. So the update to this is that the State Water Board approved this plan yesterday, despite all of the efforts that many of the farmers did to stop this plan. We went with Jake and many of his other farming friends up to the Capitol to watch them as they rallied for a change and to ask these state lawmakers for a better plan and a better solution. Despite all of that, and despite delaying that vote 2 times, I believe, they decided to go ahead and vote for this yesterday after hours upon hours of testimony. I sat in for some of that yesterday, and it was pretty powerful to hear what everyone had to say. But today, now that the vote has been decided, I wanted to hear from you, Jake, on how are you feeling about this vote. You know, they did approve to go ahead and approve the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. How are you feeling today?
Well, frankly, I think we're all a little bit angry and aggravated. When we started this process, and Lena, you were right there with us, 1,500 people went to the Capitol in Sacramento. Bipartisan speakers from both sides of the aisle said this is not the right way to go about implementing this regulation for the supposed protection of salmon. The extensions that you mentioned were designed to give time for voluntary settlement agreements to come to fruition. And on the Tuolumne River, the Modesto-Turlock Irrigation Districts and our partners on the river actually came to a settlement agreement with the Department of Water Resources and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on a better, workable solution than the state taking a bunch of water and sending it down the river. We presented that to the State Water Board, and they still proceeded with their water grab. And frankly, at this point, that is what it is. The State Water Board said, we will give you more time to come to an agreement with the Department of Water Resources and Department of Fish and Wildlife. We did that, and they still said no. So at this point, everybody who's in those areas between Stanislaus, Tuolumne, Merced counties, Stanislaus, San Joaquin, and Merced counties on the Stanislaus, Tuolumne, Merced rivers, this is now a very serious issue where we're looking at seeing a lot of our water sucked out of our reservoirs and sent out to the ocean when they were presented a better way to protect the salmon fishery. So we're looking at a government regulatory drought, induced drought in the future. When we know climate change is happening, we're going to have longer droughts and less rain in shorter periods of time. We know we need to capture that water when we have it to have it during the drought time, and the state's plan completely sets that back. I don't know how we should hold our regulatory body to a higher standard than trying to regress. You cannot progress as a society by making regressive regulations, and that's exactly what they did. And it's going to cost lost jobs, fallowed farmland, overpumping of groundwater, very serious issues in our community that will impact 17 disadvantaged communities, farm workers, and a lot of people who can't afford to lose their jobs will lose their jobs because of 4 people on the State Water Board.
Wow. And it's a very emotional thing. I know there's a lot of people that have been involved in these conversations. So for the people that are just now tuning into our Facebook Live that maybe haven't been following our coverage of this, in layman's terms, the state water grab, what they will be doing is they're going to increase the water flows from 3 rivers out here in this area into the Delta. So they're going to increase the water flows into the Delta to improve the habitat for fish and the environment out there. And what that will do is that's going to take away some of the water that would be going to the farmers and to the communities like Modesto here. Does that sound kind of...
Yeah, and not only that, but the state says, well, you can make it up by pumping groundwater. When we already have groundwater problems in California, over-pumping groundwater causes water quality problems. Most of our rural communities, our rural schools, all depend on groundwater, and to have decreased water quality in those in those areas is unacceptable. But 4 people on the State Water Board voted to implement regulations that will create groundwater problems in our rural schools and communities, and that is absolutely unacceptable. And as Lena just said, it's for the stated purpose of benefiting fish. However, they were presented a plan that the California Department of Fish and Wildlife endorsed, saying this is a plan that will benefit salmon species on the Tuolumne River without having these detrimental impacts. And they overruled it and said, no, we're going to go ahead and send the water to the ocean. Good luck to your communities.
And so let's talk about some of the consequences here. You know, this is something that many of the farmers and some of the communities here in this area have pushed back against, and they went to the Capitol and said, we don't want this here, we don't want this plan. So what are the consequences moving forward that some farmers could see in the long term from this plan of taking some of this water and literally moving it to the ocean?
Well, in the short term, instead of actually implementing this plan, which would have started benefiting salmon species in the environment right now, including new water flows, including salmon habitat restoration, spawning grounds, all projects that could have been started in 2019, this is now going to court. Lawyers will take over, there will be lawsuits filed, and this is now going to be fought. And if in time the state's plan comes to fruition, it will mean hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland in the San Joaquin Valley being fallowed because there isn't enough water to support those farms, the people who work on those farms. The loss of that revenue impacts a lot of other people who depend upon those jobs. There are a lot of people in our communities who aren't directly farmers, but their job depends on ag. And those people will see the impacts as well. And when you start fallowing farmland, your property values go down. That means property tax revenue goes down. Property taxes go to our counties to provide services like police and fire, services for homeless. Without having that tax revenue, we will see loss of services in our communities that we all depend on to help keep us safe.
Absolutely. And one of the questions I asked Jake earlier today in our interview, I asked him, this is an emotional thing, and I asked him, is this heartbreaking? And Jake, you talked about how this kind of angers you a little bit more than breaks your heart. So tell me more about that.
Heartbreaking to me is when you go, what are you going to do about it? This is not something anyone should take lightly and sit aside and say, well, what are we going to do about it? To see the destruction of our communities, to see the loss of jobs, the loss of economic stimulus, and the impact to 17 disadvantaged communities just in the Stanislaus County area is unacceptable. To see farm workers put out on the street because there isn't enough water to keep the farm going, so those people are now out of a job, that is unacceptable behavior. So to say it's heartbreaking, to me, Lena, is the wrong answer. This is aggravating, and people aren't going to take this sitting mildly. I think that as we look to the future and try and find solutions, Governor-elect Gavin Newsom had written a letter to the State Water Board saying give time for voluntary agreements. We provided a voluntary agreement, and the State Water Board acted anyway to endorse this horrible plan, even though they had a better solution presented to them. So I would hope that you get somebody like Gavin Newsom who can take a look at this, who directed the State Water Board to get a voluntary agreement. They did get a voluntary agreement and they ignored it. I would hope he would take notice and start replacing people on that board.
Sure. And then, Jake, I just have one more question for you before we start actually sitting down to edit our story for tonight on ABC 10. We do have a lot of people watching this Facebook Live who maybe are not involved with the farming industry or the water issues in town, or even our environmental issues in town. These are regular people just working to earn a living. So why should these people that are watching our Facebook Live be paying attention to this? Why should they care about this big issue?
Well, if you live in San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Merced counties, the water that you depend on that comes out of your tap and groundwater, we're going to see water quality problems, because as that surface water goes away, we're going to be forced to tap those aquifers. So that means you're going to see water quality problems. With less water, it means water costs go up. With less farms, it means food prices goes up. With less property tax revenue to the farms and less property tax revenue collected by the county, it means less money for public services that we all utilize. This is something that will absolutely impact everybody in these communities. Whether you're a farmer, whether you live in the city, it doesn't matter. This is an issue that is so far-reaching. To see our water resources sent to the ocean when there was alternatives presented to the board endorsed by Department of Water Resources and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, to see the impacts that would come from this plan is unacceptable. When there is a better way, we presented a better way, and the state board, 4 of the 5 members of the state board, decided to proceed with this foolhardy plan anyway.
Wow. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, and we're going to get into some of that tonight in our story, both at 5 and 6 on ABC 10. Our full report on farmers reacting to what they're calling the state water grab. Obviously, as we've been talking about, the State Water Board did go ahead and approve this Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan yesterday in their hours and hours upon hours meeting. So we're going to hear more from Jake's reaction as well as his father's reaction. Jake is a 4th-generation farmer here in Modesto. They've been here for more than 100 years, so they have a lot to say about this. This is going to affect them and many of their neighbors here in this farming community. So we're going to hear from them at 5 and 6. I hope you'll tune in on ABC 10. Thanks.